The apartment was too quiet for a man who claimed he loved his family. Claire Morgan noticed it just after midnight, when the city outside their Manhattan high-rise was still alive, but their home felt hollow. The lights were dimmed the way Julian liked them. The glass walls reflected the skyline like a polished lie, perfect, distant, untouchable. Julian didn't come home. No text, no missed call, no excuse that needed correcting. Claire sat alone at the kitchen island, her laptop closed, her phone face down beside a cold cup of coffee. She wasn't angry. Not yet. What settled in her chest was something far more dangerous: clarity. For years she had learned the patterns, the late meetings that never showed up on calendars, the business trips that didn't align with board schedules, the way Julian's voice softened only when he thought no one important was listening. Tonight, those patterns aligned too neatly to ignore. Still, she didn't search his location. She didn't call hotels. She didn't scroll through social media hoping to catch a glimpse of a woman's shadow in the background of someone else's photo. Instead, Claire opened her laptop. There was a single document she hadn't touched in months. A plain file, no dramatic title, no emotional language, just facts, dates, decisions, signatures. She reread one line, then another. Her fingers hovered over the trackpad for a long moment. Then she deleted one sentence. That was all. From the hallway, small footsteps padded toward the kitchen. Her son stood there, half asleep, clutching his blanket. "Is Dad working again?" he asked softly. Claire knelt down, brushed his hair back, and smiled in a way that didn't frighten him. "Yes," she said. "Go back to sleep." When she tucked him in, she stayed longer than usual, watching the slow rhythm of his breathing, memorizing the way safety felt when it was still possible. Back in the kitchen, the clock ticked past 1 a.m. That was the moment Claire understood something Julian never would. A man who believes he owns everything never imagines the night his wife stops waiting. And when Julian finally walked through that door the next morning, he would have no idea that he'd already lost far more than a marriage. Julian came home just after sunrise, smelling of expensive soap and impatience. Claire heard the lock turn before she heard his footsteps, the sound sharp in the quiet apartment. He paused, as if rehearsing an apology he would never deliver. On the kitchen island waited a single envelope, cream paper, clean edges, his name centered, typed, precise. Julian frowned. "What's this?" he asked, already annoyed. Claire stood by the window, the city pale with morning. "It's what comes next," she said. He laughed, short and careless. He opened the envelope. Divorce papers. Signed. Dated. Not angry. Final. For a second, his confidence flickered. Then it returned, heavier. "You think this scares me?" he said. "You don't have leverage, Claire. You don't have money. You don't have counsel." She turned slowly. Her voice stayed even. "I don't need fear to be effective." Julian's phone buzzed. A message he ignored. He set the papers down like clutter. "You'll regret this," he said. "I can end you with a call." Claire nodded once, as if agreeing with weather. "You already tried." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You leave with nothing. I made sure of that." "I know," she replied. That certainty unsettled him. He scanned the room, searching for drama, tears, something to dominate. There was nothing. Only space. From the hallway, their son's door opened a crack. Claire lifted a hand, gentle. "Stay in your room," she said softly. The door closed. Julian scoffed. "Dragging a child into this now?" "I'm keeping him out of it," Claire said. "There's a difference." He gathered his jacket. "My lawyer will bury you." "Use whoever you like," she said. "Just don't reuse the one from last year." He froze. "What?" She didn't explain. She placed the pen beside the envelope, aligning it with care. "Sign when you're ready. Or don't. It changes nothing." Julian left without another word, unconvinced the silence meant surrender. Claire waited until the elevator chimed. Then she sat, opened her laptop, and pressed send on a message written months ago. The morning light filled the room. The war had begun. The truth didn't arrive with evidence, screenshots, or confrontation. It arrived quietly, wrapped in a child's voice that didn't know how to lie. That afternoon, Claire picked her son up from school earlier than usual. He sat in the back seat, swinging his legs, humming a tune he'd learned in music class. The city moved around them, traffic lights, pedestrians, the steady pulse of Manhattan life continuing as if nothing had shifted. "Mom," he said suddenly, staring out the window, "Dad smells different lately." Claire's hands tightened on the steering wheel. She didn't look back. "Toman, different how?" "Like the hotel soap," he said. "The one with the gold label." Her heart skipped, sharp but contained. Julian always thought children noticed nothing. He was wrong. "When did you smell that?" she asked, keeping her tone light. The boy shrugged. "That night, he didn't come home. He hugged me the next morning before school. He said he was tired." Claire felt something settle inside her. Not pain, not shock. Confirmation. At home, she made dinner as usual. No tears, no shaking hands. Routine was a form of protection. While the pasta boiled, her son sat at the counter, drawing with colored pencils. He held up a picture. "This is you," he said, pointing to a small figure with a cape. "This is me, and this is Dad, but he's far away." Claire smiled, the kind of smile mothers learn to master. "Why is he far?" the boy thought carefully. "Because he was with the lady who laughs too loud." The room went still. Claire crouched to his level, steady, controlled. "You didn't do anything wrong," she said, "and you don't need to remember that." He nodded, already moving on. "Can we watch a movie later?" "Yes," she said. "Of course." That night, after her son fell asleep, Claire sat alone in the living room. The city lights flickered beyond the glass, indifferent. She replayed the words in her mind, not as a wound, but as data. Julian's betrayal was no longer suspicion, it was fact. And facts, unlike emotions, could be handled. She opened her laptop and added one final line to her file. Not about the affair, about timing. The most dangerous thing Julian had done wasn't cheating. It was underestimating the woman who listened when everyone else spoke, and the child who told the truth without knowing it would change everything. Sloane Carter had learned to recognize victory by atmosphere. It was the quiet luxury of the hotel suite, the kind that didn't need logos to announce itself. Floor-to-ceiling windows, heavy curtains, a city view that made everything below feel smaller. She stood barefoot on the cool floor, wrapped in a robe that wasn't hers, watching Julian fasten his cufflinks in the mirror. He looked powerful in the morning light, relaxed, unbothered. That was how she knew she was winning. "You didn't go home last night," she said casually, testing the weight of the words. Julian smiled, not turning around. "I had meetings." Sloane laughed softly, the way she'd learned to laugh. Light, unthreatening, agreeable. She stepped closer, resting her chin briefly on his shoulder. He didn't pull away. That mattered. In her mind, the future was already rearranging itself. No more hiding. No more waiting. She imagined walking beside him through public spaces, not behind him. She imagined the woman she was replacing, quiet, invisible, already erased. Julian checked his phone. No messages from Claire. He noticed, and relaxed even more. "She didn't fight," he said, almost amused. "She signed." The words landed like champagne bubbles in Sloane's chest. "That's it?" she asked. "Just like that?" She never had a choice. Julian picked up his jacket. No promises, no declarations. But he didn't need to say anything. His calm was the promise. After he left, Sloane moved through the suite, untouching objects as if they were previews of a life she was about to inherit. The bed, the glass table, the view. She poured herself coffee and scrolled through her phone, already editing captions she hadn't posted yet. She didn't notice what was missing. No mention of timelines, no talk of lawyers, no acknowledgement of consequences. That afternoon, she met a friend for lunch and let the truth slip in pieces. "He's leaving his wife," she said, smiling. "It's complicated, but it's happening." Her friend raised an eyebrow. "And you?" Sloane hesitated, just for a second. "I'm chosen," she said finally. But that night, alone again, she replayed every conversation in her head. Not what Julian said, but what he didn't. Powerful men, she would soon learn, didn't choose women. They chose convenience. And Sloane Carter had mistaken proximity for security and silence for loyalty. By the time she realized the difference, it would already be too late. By the end of the week, Claire Morgan officially had nothing. Her credit cards stopped working first. One by one, quiet and efficient, as if money itself had decided she no longer existed. At the grocery store, the terminal beeped softly. Declined. At the pharmacy, the same sound. Declined again. The cashier avoided her eyes, embarrassed on her behalf. Claire thanked her anyway. At home, she logged into the joint accounts. Locked. A message waited in her inbox from the family office. Polite, rehearsed, final. All discretionary access had been suspended, pending legal clarification. Julian didn't call to explain. He didn't have to. This was how he fought. Not with shouting, not with cruelty that left marks, but with systems. With silence, with pressure that made people fold on their own. The lawyer they had shared for years declined to represent her. "Conflict of interest," he said, voice tight. Claire understood what that meant. Julian had already been there first. That night, she packed a single suitcase, not because she was leaving immediately, but because she needed to know she could. Documents, photos, her son's favorite book, essentials only. Survival required clarity. Her son watched from the doorway. "Are we moving?" he asked. "No," Claire said gently. "We're just organizing." He accepted that answer the way children do, completely, without suspicion. When Julian returned briefly to collect more clothes, he barely looked at her. "I'll have my attorney handle communication," he said. "You'll receive terms," Claire nodded. "I expected that." "You should," he replied. "You don't have leverage anymore." That word again. Leverage. He said it like truth, like gravity. After he left, Claire sat at the kitchen table long after her son fell asleep. The apartment felt different now. Smaller. Exposed. She allowed herself one moment to feel it. The isolation, the unfairness, the sheer imbalance of power. Then she stood up. Claire opened her laptop, powered by borrowed Wi-Fi and quiet resolve. She didn't search for sympathy. She didn't search for rescue. She searched for records. Because while Julian believed she had no exit, Claire understood something he never had. An exit doesn't appear when someone gives it to you. It appears when you remember where the walls actually are, and which ones were never real to begin with. 7 years earlier, Julian Morgan had been in a hurry. The company was expanding fast back then. Investors were impatient. Lawyers rotated in and out of glass conference rooms, sliding documents across polished tables. Julian signed most of them without reading past the first page. That was his habit. Speed over caution, confidence over detail. Claire remembered that day clearly. They had been sitting side by side in a boardroom overlooking Midtown, the city bright and ambitious below them. Julian had been distracted, checking his phone, nodding while someone explained clauses he assumed were irrelevant. "This one's standard," the attorney said. "Just a formality." Claire had looked at the document longer than anyone else in the room. Not because she distrusted the lawyer, but because she understood people. She knew how power aged, how success changed men who believed it would last forever. She had said nothing. Julian signed. Now, years later, Claire sat alone in a borrowed office space, scrolling through old files on her laptop. The Wi-Fi was slow, the chair uncomfortable, but the document was still there, scanned and saved in a folder Julian had never opened. It wasn't a prenup. It wasn't a divorce clause. That was why he'd ignored it. It was an internal ethics and governance agreement, drafted during the company's early funding rounds. Buried in legal language was a provision that tied executive authority to personal conduct, specifically, undisclosed conflicts of interest and misuse of company resources. Julian had assumed it applied to other people. Claire read the lines again, carefully. Not with anger, with precision. The dates aligned, the travel expenses, the off-book reimbursements, the business meetings held in places that had nothing to do with business. He hadn't just betrayed his marriage, he had exposed his company. Claire leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment, not to celebrate, to steady herself. This wasn't revenge, this was consequence. She copied the relevant sections into a new file, adding timestamps and references. Everything traceable, everything clean. Julian believed he'd stripped her of leverage. What he hadn't understood was this. Leverage doesn't always come from money, or lawyers, or public sympathy. Sometimes, it comes from being the only person in the room who was paying attention when everyone else was distracted. Claire saved the file and shut the laptop. For the first time since the night Julian hadn't come home, she allowed herself a small, private smile. The game had changed, and Julian was still playing by rules he didn't realize no longer protected him. The boardroom on the 42nd floor was designed to intimidate. Glass walls, a long, polished table. The city stretched beneath them like proof of success. Julian Morgan had walked into this room hundreds of times, always certain it belonged to him. That morning, he took his usual seat at the head of the table, adjusted his jacket, and prepared to perform confidence. He didn't notice the silence right away. Normally, conversations buzzed before meetings began. Small talk, market gossip, quiet alliances forming. Today, no one spoke. Eyes lowered, screens glowed without purpose. Julian cleared his throat. "Let's get started." The CFO didn't open the presentation. Instead, she folded her hands. "Before we begin," she said carefully, "there are a few questions the board would like clarified." Julian smiled. Of course. A screen lit up behind him. Not charts, not projections. Travel logs, expense summaries, dates highlighted in yellow. Julian's smile stiffened. "These reimbursements," a board member said, leaning forward. "Can you explain their classification?" Julian glanced at the screen. Hotels, flights, private bookings, all familiar, all defensible, at least they used to be. "They were business-related," he said. "Approved through proper channels," another voice cut in. "Approved by whom?" Julian paused. Just long enough. The room felt smaller now. He sensed it. The shift. Not accusation yet. Suspicion. The kind that didn't fade. "There are discrepancies," the CFO continued. "Locations that don't align with client activity. Repeated overlaps with personal travel." Julian's jaw tightened. "Are you questioning my integrity?" No one answered immediately. That was worse. "Integrity isn't the question," the chairman said calmly. "Exposure is." Julian scanned the room, searching for allies, faces he'd promoted, people he'd trusted. None met his eyes. Claire wasn't there. That unsettled him more than the numbers. She should have been, defensive, panicked, scrambling. Instead, Her absence felt deliberate, strategic. "We're not drawing conclusions," the chairman continued, "but until this is reviewed, certain authorities will be temporarily reassigned." Julian stood. "You can't sideline me based on speculation." "Based on risk," the chairman replied. The word landed hard. Julian gathered his things, every movement controlled, every breath measured. He left the room without looking back. Inside the elevator, his reflection stared back at him, polished, powerful, and suddenly unsure. For the first time in his career, Julian Morgan understood something fundamental. This wasn't a private problem he could bury. This was the beginning of a public fall, and he had no idea who had pushed the first piece. Sloane Carter felt the shift before anyone explained it to her. It began with silence. Julian's calls grew shorter, clipped, distracted. Texts that once arrived instantly now took hours. When they did, they carried no warmth, only logistics. "Busy." Later. "Can't talk." At first, she told herself this was temporary. Powerful men went through storms. She had expected turbulence. What she hadn't expected was to feel invisible so quickly. They met for dinner at a quiet restaurant overlooking the river. Julian arrived late, suit rumpled, phone already in his hand. He barely touched his food. "You okay?" she asked carefully. "I'm handling it," he said. "The board is being cautious. It'll pass." Sloane nodded, though something tightened in her chest. "Handling what, exactly?" He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time, she saw calculation instead of desire. "It's complicated," he said. "You don't need to worry about it." The words landed wrong. She wasn't used to being dismissed. That night, alone in her apartment, Sloane opened her laptop and began searching. Articles, filings, corporate chatter, nothing definitive, but enough fragments to raise questions. Temporary reassignment, internal review, risk exposure. Her stomach dropped. She thought of the future she'd already imagined, the invitations, the public appearances, the quiet power of being chosen. None of it appeared anywhere official. Her name was nowhere, not attached to him, not protected. The next morning, she called a lawyer she trusted, framed it casually. "If someone is involved with a CEO during a separation," she asked, "does that create any standing?" The pause on the other end said everything. "No," the lawyer replied. "Not without documentation. Not without acknowledgement." Sloane hung up slowly. That afternoon, she texted Julian. "We need to talk about where this is going." The message stayed unread. For the first time, fear crept in. Not of losing him, but of realizing what she had never truly had. Access without security. Attention without commitment. A front-row seat to a collapse she couldn't control. She replayed every conversation, every promise implied, but never spoken. She had mistaken discretion for devotion, silence for strategy. Powerful men didn't share risk. They shared shelter only when it benefited them. As the city darkened outside her window, Sloane Carter finally understood the truth she had avoided since the beginning. She hadn't been chosen. She had been convenient. And convenience is always the first thing discarded when consequences arrive. Claire didn't plan to see Ethan Blake that morning. She had borrowed a quiet corner in a shared office near Midtown, the kind of place where freelancers worked with headphones on and no one asked questions. Her laptop was open, files neatly arranged, coffee cooling beside her. For the first time in days, her thoughts felt ordered. Then a familiar voice said her name. "Claire." She looked up, and there he was, older, broader at the shoulders, hair threaded with gray that suited him. Ethan Blake. The last man who had seen her work before she disappeared into marriage. They stared at each other for a moment, measuring time. "I didn't know you were back in this part of the world," he said. I wasn't, Claire replied honestly. Not until now. They sat across from each other, the space between them calm, uncharged. Ethan didn't ask why she was there. He didn't mention Julian. He didn't offer sympathy disguised as curiosity. Instead, he glanced at her screen. You still organize your notes the same way, he said. Dates first, feelings last. Claire allowed herself a small smile. None some habits survive. Ethan ordered coffee for both of them without asking. Black. The way she used to take it during long nights preparing briefs no one else wanted to read. I heard things, he said finally. Nothing specific. That's intentional, Claire replied. He nodded. Good. There was relief in that, being understood without performance. Ethan had always known when to listen, and more importantly, when not to speak. You don't look broken, he said. Not as a compliment, as an observation. I'm not, Claire said. I'm just recalibrating. Ethan leaned back. If you need perspective, I have some. If you need distance, I respect that too. She studied him for a moment, then closed her laptop. I might need someone who remembers who I was before all this. His expression softened, not with pity, but recognition. Why, I never forgot. They didn't touch. They didn't make plans. They simply sat, two people aligned in the quiet after impact. When Claire left the office later, she felt lighter, not because someone had offered to save her, but because someone had seen her strength without needing proof. And that mattered more than she was ready to admit. Julian noticed the change in the smallest way possible. His card declined at a private car service he had used for years. Not dramatically. No raised voices. No scene. Just a polite pause, a quiet apology, and a request for an alternative payment method. He laughed it off. Systems glitched. People panicked too easily. But the pattern didn't stop. Later that day, his assistant informed him that 2 routine transfers had been flagged for review. Compliance, she said. Temporary. Standard procedure. Her voice was careful in a way it had never been before. Julian felt a tightness in his chest he refused to name. At the office, access that had once been automatic now required confirmation. His badge still worked, but doors opened more slowly. Permissions needed approvals. Conversation stopped when he entered rooms. This wasn't punishment. This was caution. In his glass-walled office, Julian made calls. Bankers first. Then legal. Then a member of the board he considered loyal. Each conversation ended the same way. Measured. Vague. Distant. Let's wait until the review is complete, they said. Review. The word echoed. That evening, Julian returned to his apartment alone. The space felt unfamiliar without Claire's quiet order. He poured a drink and checked his phone. No messages from Sloane. He hadn't noticed when that stopped. For the first time, he opened his laptop and searched his own name. Nothing catastrophic. Yet. But the language was shifting. Internal assessment. Risk management. Governance concerns. Julian slammed the laptop shut. He told himself this was temporary. He had survived worse. He had built himself from nothing. A man like him didn't fall because of paperwork. But beneath the confidence, something else moved. Doubt. Across the city, Claire sat in a small, borrowed space, reading confirmation emails one by one. She hadn't sent accusations. She hadn't leaked stories. She had simply allowed the right processes to begin. The illusion Julian lived inside, of control, of immunity, was cracking not from attack, but from exposure. That was the most dangerous kind. When Julian finally lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, it wasn't Claire he thought about. It was the feeling he could no longer escape. The realization that power only lasts while people believe in it. And belief, once shaken, never returns quietly. Claire didn't ask for help. That was the mistake everyone assumed she would make. Instead, help arrived the way it often does in real life, quietly, from someone who had been watching longer than anyone realized. The call came late in the afternoon, from a number she didn't recognize. Claire let it ring once before answering. "Claire Morgan," a man said calmly. "This is Daniel Reeves." She straightened slightly. Reeves was a senior board member at Julian's company, conservative, careful, known for never choosing sides until the outcome was clear. "I'm listening," she replied. There was a pause on the line. "I won't take much of your time. I just wanted to confirm something." "Go ahead." "You didn't initiate the compliance review," he said. "Not a question, a statement." Claire smiled faintly. "No." Another pause, longer this time. "But you knew it would happen." "Yes." Reeves exhaled slowly, as if releasing a weight he'd carried alone. "That's what I thought," he explained without embellishment. The board had uncovered inconsistencies months ago but lacked context. When the internal ethics file resurfaced, clean, documented, impossible to dismiss, it gave them exactly what they needed. Not a scandal. A process. "No one wants a public implosion," Reeves said, "but we can't protect someone who's become a liability." "I'm not asking you to," Claire replied. "That's why I called," he said. "You're not trying to burn anything down. You're just letting the truth stand." After the call ended, Claire sat still for a long moment. Not relieved, not triumphant, grounded. Across town, Julian sensed something had shifted again. Messages went unanswered. Meetings were postponed. A name he trusted no longer returned his calls. The ground beneath him wasn't collapsing. It was withdrawing. That night, Claire walked her son through the park near their apartment. The air was cool, the sky dimming into evening. He kicked at fallen leaves, laughing, unaware of boardrooms or leverage or power. "You okay, Mom?" he asked suddenly. "Yes," she said honestly. "I am." And for the first time, that answer didn't feel like something she was practicing. An ally had stepped forward, not out of loyalty, not out of affection, but out of alignment with reality. That was more powerful than friendship, because when the truth stands on its own, it doesn't need defenders. It only needs people brave enough to stop protecting the lie. Julian hadn't planned to see his son that evening. The day had drained him in ways he didn't yet have language for. Meetings postponed, calls unanswered. The unnerving sense that the ground beneath his authority was thinning. He told himself he needed rest, distance, control. But when he stepped into the apartment to pick up a few remaining things, his son was there, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, building something from mismatched blocks. "Dad," the boy said, looking up, "you're early." Julian forced a smile. "Just grabbing some stuff." The child nodded, accepting the answer without suspicion. He always did. Julian had counted on that, on how little children asked for, how easily they adjusted. As Julian moved through the room, he felt watched, not judged, observed. "Dad," his son said again, quieter this time. "Why do grown-ups get scared when they're not loud anymore?" Julian stopped. "What do you mean?" he asked, keeping his voice steady. The boy stacked 2 blocks carefully. "You used to talk a lot. On the phone. Loud. Now you don't. And your face looks different." The words landed without accusation, without intent. That was what made them dangerous. Julian crouched, searching for something convincing. "I'm just tired," he said. "Work stuff." The boy studied him, eyes clear. "Mom's not tired like that." Julian's chest tightened. "She's strong," he said finally. His son nodded. "Yeah, she doesn't look scared." The room felt smaller, not because of walls, but because Julian had nowhere to step that didn't reveal something. He stood too quickly. "I have to go." "Okay," the boy said. Then, as Julian reached the door, he added, "Dad?" Julian turned. "You're not bad," his son said. "You're just losing." Julian left without responding. In the elevator, the words replayed, not as insult, not as shame, but as recognition. Boardrooms questioned strategy. Lawyers questioned exposure. But a child had named the truth without agenda. Losing wasn't about money or position. It was about the moment when even the people who once believed you were invincible could see the cracks. That night, Julian lay awake, staring into darkness. And for the first time, fear didn't come from the possibility of public ruin. It came from knowing that his son had already noticed the fall. Sloane Carter had always believed she was smart about timing. That belief was the only thing keeping her calm as the city outside her apartment shifted into night. She sat on the edge of her couch, phone in hand, scrolling through headlines that still avoided Julian's name, but danced close enough to feel dangerous. Internal review, temporary reassignment, governance concerns. None of it sounded final. Yet, Julian hadn't answered her last 3 messages. That was when Sloane understood something essential. When powerful men stop responding, it's not because they're busy. It's because they're deciding who is worth carrying forward and who is expendable. She opened a folder on her laptop. Screenshots, messages, receipts. Not collected out of malice, but instinct. Sloane had always known how to protect herself. She just hadn't expected to need protection from the man she thought she was winning. Her phone rang. Julian's name flashed on the screen. She answered immediately. "I was starting to think you forgot about me." His voice was controlled, stripped of warmth. "We need to be careful right now. Careful. Not we'll get through this. Not trust me." "Are they coming after you?" she asked. "They're asking questions," he said. "Which means you need to stay invisible." The word hit harder than any insult. "Invisible?" she repeated. "After everything?" "Sloane," he said sharply, "don't make this harder." Silence stretched between them. Then she spoke, slower, deliberate. "You never planned to include me." Julian didn't deny it. That was the answer. After the call ended, Sloane didn't cry. She didn't scream. So she opened her laptop and began organizing the files with professional detachment. If she was going to disappear, it wouldn't be without securing her landing. The next morning, she requested a consultation with a legal advisor connected to the board. Not accusing, not dramatic, just factual. "I believe I may have information relevant to your review," she said calmly. Across town, Julian sensed the shift too late. A meeting he wasn't invited to. A name he hadn't expected to hear. Sloane Carter. By the time he realized what she'd done, the narrative was already changing. Not a jealous mistress. Not a scandal. A cooperating witness. Sloane had never loved Julian. She had loved proximity to power. And when power wavered, she did what survival demanded. She stepped away from him, carrying the final piece that ensured his fall would not be temporary and not forgivable. The gala at the Plaza Hotel was meant to stabilize the narrative. Crystal lights, controlled smiles, donors in tailored suits, everything designed to suggest continuity. Julian Morgan arrived late, as usual, believing timing still belonged to him. Cameras flashed. Applause followed habit, not certainty. Claire wasn't on the guest list. That alone unsettled him. Inside the ballroom, the program moved smoothly. Speeches about innovation, toasts to leadership. Julian relaxed just enough to forget the tension in his jaw. He shook hands, delivered practiced warmth, and avoided eye contact with anyone who might ask real questions. Then the moderator announced a brief Q&A. Julian's smile froze. A man near the front stood. Not a journalist, not an activist. A donor. Old money. Calm voice. "This question is for Mr. Morgan," he said. "Regarding the company's ethics framework adopted in its early funding rounds, Can you confirm whether executive conduct clauses were triggered during the current internal review? The room went quiet. Julian's pulse spiked. He searched the faces around him, looking for a cue, a lifeline. None came. That framework is confidential, he said, choosing firmness. Internal matters shouldn't be speculated on in public. The man nodded. Understood. Then perhaps you can clarify whether personal reimbursements overlapping with undisclosed relationships constitute a conflict under that same framework. A murmur rippled through the crowd, soft, restrained, unmistakable. Julian felt heat climb his neck, and he opened his mouth, then closed it. Any answer would confirm what silence already had. From the side of the room, a board member stood. Not to accuse, to conclude. For transparency, he said evenly, the company will issue a statement following tonight's event. That was it. No shouting, no scandalous reveal, just alignment. The truth placed where it could no longer be ignored. Julian forced a nod, the gesture stiff, ceremonial. Applause followed, thin, polite, obligatory. Cameras caught the moment his smile cracked, just enough. Outside, the city lights burned steady, indifferent to collapse. Across town, Claire watched the live stream on mute. She didn't smile. She didn't flinch. She simply closed her laptop when it was over. The exposure wasn't about humiliation. It was about ending the illusion. Julian had built his power on control of rooms like this. Tonight, a single question, asked at the right place by the right voice, had taken that control away. And there would be no rewriting what everyone had already seen. The morning after the gala, Julian Morgan woke up to a different city. It looked the same from his penthouse windows. Steel, glass, ambition stacked toward the sky. But it no longer responded to him. His phone was full, yet empty. Messages arrived, carefully worded, stripped of loyalty. Meetings were postponed. Calls were redirected. The language of power had changed overnight. At 9 a.m., a calendar notification appeared. Special board session. Attendance required. No agenda attached. Julian arrived early, dressed sharper than usual, as if precision could still command respect. The boardroom felt colder than before. The seats were filled, but the energy was vacant, procedural. The chairman didn't waste time. "Julian," he said, folding his hands, "this isn't disciplinary, it's structural." Julian scoffed lightly. "You're overreacting to optics." "This isn't about optics," the chairman replied. "It's about exposure and risk." A folder slid across the table toward him. Inside were documents Julian had seen before, only now they were arranged differently. Timelines aligned, patterns highlighted, language tightened. "Effective immediately," the chairman continued. "Your executive authority is suspended pending final review. Interim leadership has been appointed." Julian stared at him. "You're removing me." "We're removing uncertainty," another board member said. "You've become it." The words landed harder than anger ever could. Julian stood abruptly. "This company exists because of me." "It exists despite you now," the chairman replied calmly. Silence followed. Final. Administrative. Irreversible. Julian left the building through a side exit. No cameras, no audience. Just glass doors closing behind him, locking out the world that once revolved around his signature. Across town, Claire received the update in a single-sentence email. No celebration. No relief. Just confirmation. She closed her laptop and took her son to school, holding his hand a little longer at the crosswalk. The city moved around them, unaware that an empire had shifted. Julian spent the afternoon alone, pacing rooms that suddenly felt ornamental. He replayed every decision, every assumption, and searching for the moment things turned. He didn't realize yet that the fall wasn't punishment. It was consequence. Power had not been taken from him violently. It had simply stepped away, because too many people had stopped believing he deserved it. And once belief leaves, nothing built on it can remain standing. Sloane Carter packed her apartment in silence. There were no tears, no dramatic phone calls, no friends rushing over with sympathy. Just boxes stacked neatly by the door, and the low hum of the city outside, indifferent as ever. The lease would end in 2 weeks. The invitations had stopped coming even sooner. Her phone buzzed once, an alert from a financial app reminding her of a balance that hadn't changed in days. She closed it without reading. Money had never been the real currency she was after. It was access, visibility, security by association. And now, none of that existed. Julian hadn't called since the board decision became public. Not to explain, not to apologize, not even to ask what she planned to do. The distance between them had solidified into something permanent, like glass cooling after it shatters. Sloane scrolled through old messages, noticing what she hadn't before. How often she'd filled the silence. How rarely he'd committed to anything that could be held against him. No timelines, no promises, no shared risk. She closed the thread. At a cafe near the river, she met a recruiter who spoke politely but vaguely. "Your background is interesting," the woman said. "But given the circumstances, companies are being cautious." Cautious. The word followed Sloane everywhere now. That evening, she walked past a familiar hotel, the one where she'd once stood barefoot, believing she was stepping into a new life. The windows reflected her back at herself, composed, alone, unchanged. For the first time, she allowed the truth to settle without resistance. She hadn't been special. She had been useful. And usefulness has an expiration date the moment consequences arrive. Sloane returned home, sealed the last box, and left her keys on the counter. There was no victory to claim, no story to reshape. Cooperation had bought her distance from the fallout, but nothing else. No protection. No future written in anyone else's name. As she closed the door behind her, she understood the cost clearly. She had traded her integrity for proximity to power, and power had never intended to carry her through the fall. Outside, the city kept moving. New faces, new stories, new ambitions forming in places she would no longer enter. Sloane Carter walked away lighter than she'd expected, because once the illusion collapsed, there was nothing left to hold. And that, she realized too late, was the emptiest ending of all. Claire Morgan didn't feel victorious. That surprised her. The headlines had shifted. Julian's name appeared less often now, stripped of titles, framed in past tense. Friends forwarded articles, as if they were trophies. Strangers sent quiet messages of admiration. Everyone expected relief, celebration, closure. What Claire felt instead was space. On a Saturday morning, she took her son to Central Park. No agenda, no phone calls waiting. The air was crisp, sunlight cutting clean lines through the trees. He ran ahead, chasing pigeons, but laughing without looking back to see if she was watching. She always was. They sat on a bench near the water, sharing a pretzel from a street cart. Ordinary. Unremarkable. Perfect. "You're smiling more," her son said, swinging his legs. Claire glanced at him. "Am I?" He nodded. "Like before." Before. The word didn't hurt anymore. That afternoon, Claire declined an invitation to speak at a private event. Then another. And another. She wasn't hiding. She was choosing. There was a difference. She spent the evening organizing her apartment, not erasing the past, just reshaping it. Photos moved, files archived, a chapter closed without ceremony. When she found an old notebook from years ago, she flipped through it slowly. Ideas, plans, versions of herself she had postponed. None of them were gone. Claire made tea and sat by the window as the city settled into night. She didn't think about Julian. not out of discipline, but because her mind no longer returned there naturally. Power had left him, and with it, his gravity. Her phone buzzed. A short message from Ethan. "No rush. Just wanted to say I'm glad you're breathing easier." Claire smiled. She didn't reply right away. Peace had taught her that nothing meaningful needed to be rushed. Later, when her son slept, she stood in the quiet and listened. To the hum of traffic, to her own steady breath, to the absence of tension she had once mistaken for normal life. Claire hadn't won by destroying anyone. She had won by refusing to let the damage define her future. And that choice, the decision to stop fighting a war that no longer existed, was the moment her life truly became her own again. Healing didn't arrive the way Claire once imagined it would. There were no sudden breakthroughs, no cinematic moments of forgiveness or release. What came instead were small decisions, repeated daily, until they reshaped her life from the inside out. On weekday mornings, after walking her son to school, Claire stopped at the same cafe. She ordered the same drink, sat at the same corner table, and opened a book she'd owned for years, but never had time to read. Not to escape. To remember how it felt to think without interruption. Healing, she learned, was discipline. Some days were easier than others. There were mornings when an old memory surfaced unexpectedly. A phrase Julian used to say. A tone that once made her shrink. When that happened, Claire didn't argue with it. She acknowledged it, then let it pass. My pain only demanded attention when it was ignored. She rebuilt her routines carefully. Exercise not to punish her body, but to feel present in it. Work not to prove anything, but to engage her mind again. Evenings spent cooking simple meals, listening to her son describe his day in vivid, unfiltered detail. "You seem calm," he told her one night. "Like when we went to the beach." Claire smiled. Calm. That was the word she'd been reaching for without knowing it. There were invitations she declined, and opportunities she postponed. Healing wasn't about filling space as quickly as possible. It was about choosing what deserved to enter it. Late one evening, Claire opened her laptop and reread the file that had started everything. The dates, the facts, the precision. She closed it gently and archived it. Not erased. Just placed where it belonged, in the past. She realized then that healing wasn't about forgetting what had happened. It was about no longer needing to revisit it to feel whole. Claire shut down the laptop and turned off the lights. The apartment felt warm, grounded, hers. No tension lingered in the walls. No voices echoed where they didn't belong. Healing hadn't made her softer. It had made her clearer. And clarity, she understood now, was the strongest form of peace she had ever known. Claire hadn't been looking for love. That was the first difference. She noticed it on an ordinary evening, after her son had fallen asleep, and the apartment settled into its familiar quiet. Her phone buzzed, not with urgency, not with expectation, but with a message that didn't demand anything from her. It was Ethan. "I'm nearby. If you feel like walking, I'm free. If not, no worries. No pressure. No assumption." Claire considered it for a moment, then replied, "Yeah." They met on a quiet street, the city softened by dusk. Ethan didn't comment on how she looked or ask how she was holding up. He simply fell into step beside her, matching her pace without trying to lead. They walked without destination, past closed storefronts, under streetlights that hummed gently overhead. Conversation came in pieces, about work, about books, about nothing important. The ease surprised her. At one point, Claire stopped. "You know I don't need rescuing," she said, not defensively, but clearly. Ethan nodded. "I know. That's why I'm here." The words landed differently than promises ever had. Not an offer, a position. He told her about his own past mistakes, not as confessions, but as context. She shared parts of her story without editing it for comfort. There was no urgency to fix anything, no future being negotiated in advance. When they reached her building, Ethan didn't assume he was invited inside. He didn't linger. "I'll see you," he said. "Not soon. Not tomorrow. Just see you." Claire watched him walk away and felt something unfamiliar. Safety without dependence. In the weeks that followed, their connection grew quietly. Dinners when schedules aligned, long conversations that ended without exhaustion. Her son liked him, not because Ethan tried, but because he didn't. One evening, as Claire tucked her son into bed, he asked, "Is Ethan staying?" "No," she said. "He goes home." Her son smiled sleepily. "That's good. He still comes back." Claire understood then what made this different. Love wasn't being offered as a replacement for pain. It was arriving as an addition to a life already rebuilt. For the first time, Claire wasn't choosing a man to fill a void or stabilize her world. She was choosing someone because her world was finally stable enough to share. And that, she realized, was the only kind of love worth accepting. Julian Morgan learned what silence sounds like after the fall. It wasn't dramatic. No sirens, no crowds, just empty rooms and unanswered messages. The penthouse echoed now, stripped of the rhythm that once validated him. His phone still worked, but it no longer commanded. Names that used to answer immediately had been replaced by polite delays and formal distance. He told himself it was temporary, but time kept moving without him. When the final board decision arrived, it came in a brief email. No negotiation. No appeal. The language was clean, irreversible. Julian closed his laptop and stared out at the skyline he no longer shaped. Power hadn't been stolen from him. It had expired. Across the city, Claire stood in a sunlit room, fastening a simple necklace before leaving the apartment. Her life had narrowed in the best way. Fewer distractions, fewer compromises, clearer mornings. Ethan waited downstairs, leaning against the railing, patient and present. They weren't rushing anything. They didn't need to. Months later, on a quiet afternoon near the water, Ethan asked her a question without spectacle. No crowd, no performance, just certainty. Claire said yes without hesitation. Not because she needed safety, because she recognized partnership. Her son walked between them, holding their hands, unconcerned with symbolism. He had learned something important from watching his mother rebuild her life. Not loudly, not bitterly, but honestly. Julian heard the news eventually, not directly. It reached him the way everything did now. Filtered, distant, final. He felt something then that surprised him. Not anger, regret. Not for losing Claire, but for underestimating her. He had believed power meant possession, control, permanence. What he never understood was this: the things that matter most can't be owned, and the people who matter most can't be managed. Claire didn't win by taking anything from him. She won by keeping herself. Love returned to her life not as rescue, but as recognition. Peace arrived not as escape, but as alignment. And justice didn't roar. It settled quietly, exactly where it belonged. Julian lived with the consequences of his choices. Claire lived with the rewards of hers. In the end, what remained was simple. One man lost everything he thought defined him. One woman gained everything she had always been. So, this is where the story quietly closes. And if you're still here with us right now, truly still here, then something in this journey touched you, maybe more deeply than you expected. Stories like this aren't really about billionaires, betrayals, or dramatic falls from power. They're about something far closer to our everyday lives. The moment we realize we can't control other people, only how we respond to what they do. As Marcus Aurelius once wrote, You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Claire didn't heal by winning louder or hurting back harder. She healed by choosing clarity, dignity, tone, and peace when chaos invited her to become bitter. Another Stoic truth says, the best revenge is not to be like your enemy, and that's exactly what happened here. Justice didn't arrive as noise. It arrived as alignment, as consequence, as truth catching up, quietly, inevitably. If this story resonated with you, maybe it's because you're rebuilding too. Maybe you're learning that walking away with your integrity intact is not a loss. It's a beginning. If that's the case, don't go through it alone. Like, share, and subscribe so we can keep telling stories that heal, not just entertain. And thank you for staying until the end. This story is a work of fiction created for storytelling and educational purposes. All characters, events, companies, and situations depicted in this video are entirely fictional and do not represent any real individuals, businesses, or actual events. Any resemblance to real people or real-life situations is purely coincidental. The narrative is intended to explore emotional resilience, personal growth, and the consequences of human choices through a dramatic lens, not to report factual claims or real-world allegations. The themes discussed, such as relationships, ethics, healing, and accountability, are presented as part of a fictional story meant to inspire reflection and conversation. Viewers are encouraged to interpret the content as a dramatized scenario rather than a statement of fact. This video does not provide legal, financial, or personal advice and should not be understood as commentary on real individuals or organizations. And its purpose is to tell a story that highlights universal life lessons in a creative and responsible way.